Hello, Dr. Rachel.
Hi, Alexis. How are you?
Really well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing really well, thank you.
Excellent. What's happening on your long weekend?
It's nice to be here, actually, because I have been in a cleaning frenzy for 2 days. My house painter finished up the inside on a Friday afternoon, and yeah, I can still see from where I'm sitting dust everywhere, and I've breathed in a lot of dust the last couple of days, but I'm making a lot of progress and that's looking good. And I've been in that sort of task mode, so I'm very grateful to just be able to sit down here with you now and have this conversation about individuation.
Yes, which is very aligned with the goal of yoga, interestingly. And Carl Jung did take quite a lot of interest in yoga. In fact, one of his later books was written with yogic philosophy in mind.
I did not know that.
Yoga in the title.
Wow.
Yeah. And our interest in Carl Jung is growing and developing through our conversations. But it does relate very much to the goal of yoga, which is to, well, in yogic terms, it's to stand in our basic nature. But I'm interested in your thoughts also on individuation. I loved your definition. Yeah, should we start with that?
Yeah, well, the definition that I put up on the Facebook page this morning was around it's a very interesting topic, because the traditional definition of individuation is around the personality or the ego, becoming stronger, becoming separate. It starts from the time we're about 2 or so, and we realize my will and the will of the those around me is different, and I'm separate, and I'm an individual. And though I might be very attached and very connected, we're also very much a separate being with our own feelings and our own will that might not align with those around us in, a moment in time. And that over the course of the lifespan, and this is making me think of all my studies in developmental psychology and the different stages of the personality as it develops, the important and essential stages, that if we progress through each developmental task or stage relatively successfully, and we could go through Erik Erikson's stages, or a couple of them anyway, a bit later, because always fascinating, and I talk about it a lot in my work with clients, that we emerge into adulthood with a solid enough sense of self, a strong enough ego that we can, even if we're feeling wobbly and unsure, we can, make decisions about our lives. We can see that it's okay to be a bit different from our friends at times, or a bit different from our parents. And the parents is the big one in my work when I'm explicitly talking with clients about individuation. It's often with their same-sex parent with whom they naturally might identify very strongly, because if we're a woman, we may have learned to be a woman largely from our mother as well as other women, and the same is true for many men. And the task of adulthood is to somehow emerge triumphant in a sense of self that is yours and not someone else's, and a realization that I'm not my mother if I'm a woman, and it's okay to be different from her and have different views and live differently and break the unwritten rules, not to rebel, but to be my true self. That's a lot, but does that make sense?
Well, it's very interesting that you say it's about separating from our parents, because in a small amount of reading I've done, my understanding is that it's about the second half of life. And while individuation for the first half might be about separating from our parents, social constructs, the second half of life, I think it's probably quite a different experience. Where the first half seems to be about developing the ego, the second half seems to be about separating from the ego. So yeah, I'm interested in how that aligns with Ericksonian or Erikson stages.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, I'll talk about some of the key ones because, what can happen is if we haven't been successful in navigating all the stages of development, we may have to go back in adulthood and kind of finish the task, as it were. The first few years of life is about trust, just a basic sense of when I put my foot forward in life, world will greet me sufficiently that I'll get my basic needs met. And some people have had trauma in those first 3 years of life, and they're still working on just a basic sense of trust. Luckily, our brains are malleable, and with time and support, we can build that basic sense of trust if we haven't had it in those first few years. And then the next couple of stages through primary school and high school, they've got different names, but they relate to things around autonomy, mastery, and industry. So what that means is hopefully if we're not too traumatized, if we don't experience too much shame and self-doubt and guilt and inferiority, we largely emerge into adulthood with some sense of our own autonomy, our agency in the world, that we can take initiative, that we can master things that we put our mind to, and that we can work hard and achieve things. So this is sort of 5 to 18 that we want to be able to get a sense of, like, I can do stuff in the world. But if we've experienced an enormous amount of shaming and criticism, or other things like trauma that can cause tons of shame, that may have dampened our sense of autonomy and mastery over our lives. And so we've got to go back later on sometimes and really resource ourselves in that way. Identity versus confusion is early adulthood. So who am I? What do I like? What do I not like? What do I want to do? What sort of people do I like to hang out with? They're sort of existential questions all along the way. And you're absolutely right about the second half of life, because as we look at Erikson's older adult stages of development, he was the first psychologist to posit that we go through different stages of development, even through adulthood. We have tasks such as intimacy, generativity, integrity. So can we find community? Can we find friendship and relationship? And can we give back to the world? And these are quite different tasks, as you've implied, than the first half of life, where it's sort of like, who am I? And then it becomes sort of like, and how do I give back through relationships, through my work, through my community, and transcend my ego? And hopefully it's strong enough that I can sort of let it go. It's a bit paradoxical. Does that make sense?
It really does. It reminds me of a seminal moment in my life. It was a Vipassana retreat, and I spent the first retreat really wondering, what's the value of suffering? So if the Buddha's first statement, which it was, on enlightenment, was life is suffering, how does that serve us? And where I landed was that we had to have these many experiences and identify with them to realize actually we're not this suffering. We are an eternal being, something that is much more lasting than this body, than this narrative, than this short-term identity. And so that does fit, with this first half of life being about almost a loss of self to my safety, my home environment, my community, but then to be able to separate from that, this definition via negativa is coming up a lot in consultation, by recognizing, well, I'm not that, I'm not my family, and I'm not my community. I can actually see who I am in a more vast way, which would lend itself to contribution, this phase of life that you and I are in, Rachel, generative. I love that word.
Yeah, what can I create that's going to be of use to others? And can I let go of some of those concerns from earlier in life, which are fear-based and ego-based? Joe has asked a really good question. How do you know which stage, if we go with Erik Erikson's stages, that you missed out on? And how do you rectify this as an adult? So, Joe, I don't think any of us missed out on it per se. I'm not sure that's quite the way to say it. Because I really like Erikson's theory. I think there's evidence for it, but there's also an intuitive, when you read about it, it's just intuitive. Go to the Wikipedia page and type in Erik Erikson with K's, because he was Danish or Dutch or something. And Erik Erikson said it's not so much, we all go through these phases, but we may not have completed the task. And in fact, none of us perfectly completed the task of becoming, the most authentic version of ourselves by the end of that period. We all got snagged along the way. I'd like to tell a quick story, which I think I told you, Alexis, already, but it's such a mundane story. And I love a good mundane story, don't you?
Yes.
It's from my own life. And then I might tell a story actually about a client who I asked her permission the other day if I could share it. She may be watching, I'm not sure. My story is that I grew up with a mother who may be listening also, who I love very much, who is extremely neat and tidy. And she, her house is Vogue magazine ready at any moment, if you ask me. And my house is not like that. And my personality is not quite as focused on the detail of housework. Anyway, one day, I think she was coming over. I was in my bathroom. I looked into my toilet and I realized it wasn't perfectly clean. And I had this anxiety imagining my mother seeing my toilet and my bathroom not being really clean. And I thought, that's funny. All I did was look in the toilet. Now I'm feeling anxious, gave the feeling a voice, and it's what will my mother think, along those lines. And in that moment, another wise voice came up inside me and said, you don't have to be like your mother. You don't have to do things like her. You don't have to believe like her. You don't have to live like her. And that doesn't mean you don't love her. It sounds really stupid to say it out loud.
No, this is good. Yes.
But it's almost as if a part of our psyche believes that to love and honor our parents, we have to take on board, which we did for the most part, and hold on to and keep their worldviews, their beliefs, their ideas, their ways of doing things. And when we realize that we don't, and it doesn't mean we're rejecting them or being naughty or anything like that, but that we're just allowing ourselves to let go of the shoulds and be who we are, then that's one of the tasks of individuation. And it can happen in these mundane moments where you decide not to clean your toilet. Now,
yeah, good move.
So I didn't clean the toilet and nothing bad happened. It was totally fine.
It is a kind of rebellion, isn't it?
Well, I'd like to say that it's not, because to me, rebellion is an aggressive rejection, even like very passive sometimes or mild, but it's still a rejection of someone else's belief. And in the rebellion, we're still subject to that belief. Whereas individuation is about really letting yourself be different and having it all be okay. Rebellion sort of says, like I'm thinking of the Pink Floyd song, the brick in the wall, it's sort of like, let's reject all the stuff we grew up with. Whereas individuation is differentiation. It's like, it's okay that my parents or grandparents were like that. I mean, if they were really abusive, then I'm not saying that's okay. But, like, it's just seeing that I can be different. I can make a decision in my heart of hearts to be who I am. And it might be very different from them. And that's so fine. Yeah.
Yes, I'm as you're speaking, I'm hearing that the loyalty to our parents' values is instinctive for our survival. And I use the word rebellion because, I mean, ideally it would be a gentle process, but I think for many of us to actively choose to take a path that we know our parents don't approve of, or even make a choice like not to clean the toilet that we know our parents wouldn't approve of, it does feel drastic because we've been conditioned to be loyal to our parents' values, which has probably saved our lives when, you know, we needed to make a certain choice to get off the road to hear our parents. And it reminds me that there is a necessity for vulnerability and fear in our situation. And I've certainly experienced it, as you've described, with my family. I can pinpoint, you know, some really prominent times in my life that were an active separation, and also again from my social belonging. And it is scary, scary, scary. It really threatens my sense of survival.
Yeah.
It points to Brené Brown's work really around vulnerability.
I agree with you about that. I think that's one of the clues that we know we're individuating is we feel like the pupa inside the cocoon. We don't know what form we're in yet. We're kind of still forming our identity or our attitude about something or our decision. And so it feels very vulnerable. You're right. Jo says, okay, so we've all gone through the stages, but we certainly haven't completed certain phases. How do you do this? I suppose it shows up in some interactions with others. Well, that's sort of what, and when maybe there's a disconnect, that's exactly right, Jo. I think what you're talking about, Alexis, is, there's a disconnect with your social group in some way or with your family in some way. It brings up anxiety or anger or something vulnerable, and you've got to sit with it and work through it. And if you've got a good therapist or coach, then that's a great person to work through it with. I would say if you're interested in doing it in this structured way, look up Erickson's stages. The Wikipedia page on the 7 stages is really detailed, and you could journal, you could contemplate which of these needs is it bringing up. Is it needs around identity and self-esteem or mastery or trust or something else? Because these stages are actually related to core needs. And then meditate on the question, what is right for me? What do I really want? And have that be okay. Let yourself want what you want.
Great line. Let yourself want what you want. Yes, that is key to individuation. This ties back into our conversations over the past few weeks about validating our needs for whatever they are. Let yourself want what you want. I love that. Yes.
Even if it's scary as hell.
And I'm loving Jo's persistence, because my sense is she's asking about trauma.
Yeah.
When you mentioned earlier, Rachel, periods that we missed out on due to being in survival mode. And Jo, your question about rectifying it is really valid. I love a direct approach. And a coach is a beautiful idea, Rachel, because my experience is that we learn mostly through transmission of knowledge. I'm hearing your words, Rachel, but really it's your experience that is passed on to me. It's that sensory understanding. And a coach who has had a lived experience of facing their trauma, identifying through a timeline can be a way to do that. Identifying periods of disturbance and then seeking, as you've said, to identify the needs. That sounds key to then moving through that task.
That developmental task. And one other strategy that I regularly do with clients is we take a memory where that developmental task was unable to be enacted, So say in teenage years where I wasn't able to bring forth my true identity or my sense of self, if I can think of a time that was distressing and reimagine it, it's called imagery re-scripting. People can Google that term.
Oh, yes.
So if you Google imagery re-scripting, you'll find some.
Come on, can't we do some?
Well, let me tell you about one that I've done, and my mum
Yes.
won't mind me sharing this.
Yes.
It was a memory. I won't go into the detail out of respect for her, but I was about 15-ish, and my mum was going through a very, very difficult time in lots of turmoil. And there were scenarios that I can remember explicitly where my interpretation of her behavior was that it was a request for emotional support from me. Now, I was 15. And I found that overwhelming. I didn't really know at that age how to deal with someone else's trauma. That was beyond my resources at that age. I was so young. So I've re-scripted those memories. I've gone back to where I was in the moment that I felt really overwhelmed. And I've brought in my adult self into the frame, into the scene. And my adult self spoke to the child self and said, hey, you don't need to do anything here. It's not your job. And my adult self spoke to my mother and said, I don't think this is a great idea, and protected me and supported me in my re-scripting process as I reimagined the memory, and told me then to said, go to your room, go outside, play some music. And so the memory was almost rewritten in a way that was much less distressing, and I felt seen and known and protected and supported. We can do this with any memory which has stuck with us that was distressing in some way. We can bring our adult self now to that memory, and we can intervene so we have a felt experience through imaginal exposure, using our imagination, of what it would have been like and kind of should have been like. And I don't use that word should very often, for us as a young one who didn't have the resources to cope any better, and how we would have felt restored to a sense of our own innocence in that developmental task. See, the problem is a lot of us were thrust into a stage of development that we weren't ready for. In my case, I wasn't ready. I didn't have mastery around giving people emotional support. I didn't have mastery around understanding trauma. I didn't even have my own identity at that age, let alone help my mother re-establish her own identity. So it was too much for me. And so it was a developmental obstruction for me at that age. So through this re-scripting, reimagining process, it's like I've completed the loop, the cycle that wasn't completed inside of me. And I did that on my own without a therapist, and it was very helpful. So some of this we can do by ourselves in meditation or in journaling or something like that.
Yes. Thank you for that suggestion, Rachel. And I love that you make it so accessible. The active imagination and the imagery re-scripting. And I would say that those listeners who do have a meditation practice will probably find it quite easy to move into active imagination. And those that don't can always put a pen to paper to hold that line of thought and to take yourself there. It's 1999 and I'm in the kitchen with my mum, and she says na 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 and I say na na na. Then my inner adult steps in and says, hey, little Lexi, or I actually often use my name to talk to myself. I find it really makes a difference. It makes it real.
Yes.
How about we try this? Like you say, would you like to go to your room right now? Would you like to just separate and let your mum find her other resources?
Yeah.
It can be as simple as that. That's been my experience. Is there anything else that you think is necessary to the process for those who would like to give it a go at home?
I agree with you about having a dialogue with yourself in the third person. And that's what imagery re-scripting gives us. My adult self came and said, use my name, and said, would you like to go up to your room now? And my child self said, I really would, yes.
Oh, that's such a loving story, Rachel. It's a really loving thing to talk to your young self.
Yeah, I think we need to talk to our young self, because the young self lives on in memories and feelings and old outdated beliefs, and we need to examine them, make them conscious, and then see if we could actually let them go. Because I let go of a belief in that moment. I guess that it's my job to emotionally fix, rescue, support my mother, which of course it wasn't, and that probably wasn't what she would have wanted or intended consciously, but she was in a bad state. And this is often how it goes with traumas, even minor traumas. The adult was themselves feeling out of control. There's another type. There's so many things to this topic of individuation. Of course, we could write a whole book and make a series of episodes, but I want to tell you the story. A client told me on Friday about how her parents grew up, like a lot of our parents, not living hand to mouth, but living sort of reactively when it came to life decisions and their money. And one thing that they didn't do, which many people don't do, is they didn't make long-term goals. They didn't sort of ask themselves, where do I want to be in 5 years or 10 years? They just sort of lived week to week. And when her mother died, my client inherited all her money because her mother hadn't set goals and spent her money kind of living her dreams, because she never took herself through that process. So she passed away with all this money. She left the money to my client, who went quickly to a financial planner who asked her really good questions like, what do you want? What are your dreams? Where would you like to be in 5 years? How would you like to be living in 10 years? And then my client said, it was a fantastic process for my client, quite a psychological one. This financial planner kind of taking her through these deep psychological questions. And she said to me, no one ever taught me to think like this. I never saw my parents planning. I never saw my parents dreaming. I never saw my parents setting goals. So she doesn't have a template. She doesn't have a mental model for how to do these kinds of behaviors because she never, ever saw it. So she's having to do this herself. Kind of for the first time. And that's another example of individuation, breaking the mold of our parents or grandparents or family and doing things new and different that they never showed us how to do. Now, all of us have done that, all of us in some ways, but can we keep doing that and keep doing that? And allowing ourselves to evolve beyond our parents' level of evolution.
Yes. Yeah, well, again, that brings us back to vulnerability and fear and moving into the unknown. If we're going to go beyond the way that our parents did it, which of course is evolution, and of course which triggers us as parents when we see our children go beyond our boundaries. But I just want to take it back a step before we move away from the imaginal exposure to your comment about it being a felt experience. It just occurred to me that the cognitive work only goes so deeply, and to embody it has been key in my experience of growth and healing. So if our listeners are planning on doing this process, I'd encourage you to reiterate it until it drops into your body, until you feel some kind of shift. And it could be as simple as a spontaneously deep breath that usually represents integration, or it could be a shift in your body. Maybe your shoulders relax, like you've kind of let go of that feeling, or an emotional response, a sense of compassion for your young self. Would be a really good sign that it's dropping into your felt experience. And I loved your comment too about being restored to our own innocence. That again is a felt experience of dropping the ego sense of self and into a more basic experience.
I think so, because it's in our ego that we feel shame and guilt. It's in our ego we can feel inflated or deflated. It's the ego that gets inflated or deflated. That which is not ego, that we can maybe only define via negativa, like you said. Because where do our dreams come from? Where does our intuition come from? Where do our deep longings come from? That's not the ego, right? We need an ego because we need to move through the world, and we need to be able to introduce ourselves at parties and all sorts of reasons. We need an ego. It's how we navigate life. And hopefully ego is similar to self-esteem in a way, like how we see ourselves, how we feel about ourselves, what we think about ourselves. If that's all very, very negative and harsh, we will suffer. So we do need to work at that ego level and be compassionate to ourselves and know that we're more than our ego, because it's our ego that gives us or holds on to shame, guilt, and certain fears. And so, yes, I agree with you that we need to be able to go to another place inside of ourselves.
Yeah, well, this brings us full circle back to our original definition. You mentioned that individuation in the first half of life is around recognizing that we're separate to our parents, which says to me that it is very much about building the ego as a protective strategy. But then from the second half of life, once we've established trust, autonomy, mastery, that there's a separation from our own ego, our own identity. I mean, the ego, from my understanding, is a false or superficial sense of self, which might act as a bit of an armor when we need to, like you say, in a party, it can be helpful, or in a business negotiation, it can certainly be helpful.
Yes.
And yet for ultimate individuation, because we're not going to die with that facade, hopefully we're going to, transition naturally away from not only these formed identities, but even this body. The second half of life, my understanding, is about separating from that highly developed, hopefully it's highly developed ego to what? I mean, this is interesting to me, and I'm aware we're coming to the end, but I know that our bodies of work have aligned in that at our last retreat, separately to each other, we both drew the very same model, which at the center of the model was the basic nature, our essential selves. Do you have any, kind of closing statements or kind of conclusions around how individuation brings us to our basic nature, especially in your understanding of your personal practice, which I know is heavily grounded in non-violent communication and even Zen Buddhism?
Yeah, well, thank you for reminding me of the 3-circle model, as I often come back to that because, and just to describe it to people listening, I don't even have a pen to draw your picture.
I can draw it for you.
The middle circle is the essential self, the innermost circle, which is where our needs and values live. So needs and values aren't ego. Ego is what forms in a way to help us get our needs. Thank you. We need our ego to move out in the world to kind of get our needs met and ask for them. But the needs and values don't live in the ego. They live in the essential self. They are the instruments in the orchestra of our soul. They're like what comes through us in this human body, in this human form. And obstructions to that life flow of needs and values is why we can get developmentally stuck, like in my story of, feeling like I had to be my mother's therapist at 15. That didn't align with my needs and values at that stage of my development. And so I got thwarted in that moment. I didn't know what to do. I felt overwhelmed. I felt incompetent. I felt shame. I felt angry that this was being expected of me. And so that can cause fight, flight, or freeze, sort of shut down in response to the pain. And then the pain is the second circle. Around the core self is the shock and the pain, the grief, the fear. And the third outer circle is our layer of protective structures, our layer of defenses, whether it's shutting down and dissociating, whether it's getting aggressive and judgmental, whether it's addiction, which is another form of escape, or whether it's perfectionism and workaholism, or there's a raft of ways in which the ego will protect and defend us from the pain. And the model with the 3 circles suggests that the way out, there we go, thank you, Lexi, essential self in the middle, pain around
me back to front. I'll post a pic, but anyway, yeah. And
we need to be able to get out of the protective structures where we feel numb or angry or ashamed. We need to go through the vulnerable pain, because the grief is in there. We process, how did I feel back then? How do I feel now? The more primary feelings. And I may need to grieve. When I do imagery rescripting with people, sometimes there are tears. There's a grief for the unmet needs at that developmental period in their life. They're sad that their needs weren't honored. And that's a very legitimate grief. And to move through that in order to fully reconnect with the needs underneath the pain, with the values that we hold in our heart of hearts. And, this is very aligned with NVC and other bodies of work. And it's ongoing work because we're human. So we just keep doing it. And that's often the work of the second half of life, because we're so busy in the first half of life just trying to get qualified and make friends and get somewhere to live and do all the tasks of young adulthood, that it's often once we've done some of those and we go, oh, this is not all it's cracked up to be. Oh, now I need to go back and look at some early history stuff. And, oh, what do I want for the rest of my life? And all these big existential questions naturally come up, and change what is most important or what we focus on in that second half of life. And this is the work, as you say, you and I have both been focused on for some time now.
I'm so enjoying your description. Thank you, Rachel.
And my mum has been watching. Hi, Mum.
Hello, Lorraine. Oh, is that okay? Too late?
Yeah, too late now.
She'll probably appreciate it.
She doesn't mind me trash talking as she doesn't mind.
No, she's a star in her own right, your mum.
There's some great questions on there. Maybe we can answer them later, Alexis.
Okay, yeah, that's easy. I'd love to do that. So just in conclusion, I'm hearing that individuation is very much about connecting with our essential selves, our needs and values. And if I'm going to sum it up, I'm going to go with let yourself want what you want. I really like that.
Or at least, let yourself wonder about what you really want as well.
Well, that's the start, isn't it?
That's the start.
But then to want it is going to make it more likely.
Yeah, exactly.
Wanting is a good thing.
Wanting, yes, especially if it's not a Porsche, right? We're not talking about those identity-based.
We're talking about strategies. We're talking about needs and values and longings.
Yes.
So is it time for you to sign off, my dear friend?
It is. I have a little bit more cleaning to do before I have a couple of visitors coming over. So
I just hope that toilet bowl is clean to Lorraine Sanders.
I'm not sure, but even if it's not, nothing bad will happen.
Nothing bad. No, you'll be more individuated.
All right. So keep doing your work, everyone. Keep being yourself. Keep striving to be more and more and more and more yourself. That's the work of individuation. And just keep noticing when you get hooked by, what other people think of you, because that is a good little invitation right there to wonder, what do I want? What do I care about?
Living inside out, the perspective inside out rather than outside in. Well, we've touched on another, obviously, a shared love. So there'll be more on this.
Yes.
Next opportunity to meet with us in person is going to be the end of May, the end of this month here at Graceville.
Yes.
Otherwise, keep joining us online. Keep giving us your beautiful comments. I'll stick around to answer those, and otherwise.
And could I announce, first of all, I want to say to everyone who's still with us, go and be unapologetically yourself. That's one way I like to say something about individuation. Don't apologize for being who you are.
Yes, actually, Mia, who's listening, posted a beautiful quote on that. I'll post that as well. Yeah, unapologetic is a great word for
Too many of us, particularly women, but some men as well. But we apologize too much just for being who we are. You're allowed to be who you are. And so I also wanted to mention that you and I are planning to run some more workshops this year in 2022, probably 3 workshops before our November retreat. So we don't have dates for that just yet, but that'll be coming soon. But flagging with you that if you'd like to join us in workshops or at a retreat in November, we would love your company at those gatherings. Will give you dates ASAP.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. The venue has been secured, but yes, we do need to confirm those dates. So fab. We look forward to seeing you all in the flesh and here online, same time, same place.
Next Sunday, probably 5. I know we keep changing it, but probably 5 next Sunday.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, Alexis.
Thank you, Rachel.
Talk to you soon. Bye.